She works at one of those grocery stores, my future father-in-law said, and he waved his fork in my general direction, like I was a footnote in a conversation he was already done having. I had been sitting at the Westbrook dining table for exactly 47 minutes. I know the precise number because I'd been checking the wrought iron clock above the sideboard every few minutes. A piece the size of a small child that existed not to tell time, but to tell you that the people in this house didn't worry about it. The house was called Westbrook Manor, which I'd learned when the invitation arrived on thick cream stock 3 weeks earlier, and which I had spent 2 days deciding whether to mention to my best friend Carmen as the funny thing it was. I decided not to. It was that kind of family. You didn't laugh at the things they found normal. You just cataloged them quietly and drove home. The occasion was a formal engagement dinner. 12 people, 3 courses, 2 wines that cost more than my monthly electric bill, and a centerpiece of autumn dahlias in cream and burgundy that I suspected had taken my future mother-in-law, Miriam, the better part of an afternoon to arrange. She was the kind of woman who showed love through floral arrangement and never quite said it out loud. I respected that, even when it exhausted me. My fiancé, Adrian, sat beside me. He was Clifford's younger son, the gentler one, people said, which in this context meant the one who occasionally remembered that other people were present in the room. We'd been together 2 years. He cried at wildlife documentaries. He left cabinet doors half open in a way that drove me crazy, and also, if I was being honest, made him feel like home. He brought me the exact right kind of coffee when I was working late, and didn't call it a gesture. I was going to marry him. Roland Pruitt, Clifford's financial advisor, sat across from me. I'd been introduced to him during cocktail hour. A careful, trim man in his early 60s with the handshake of someone who took every transaction seriously, including social ones. He'd smiled and moved on, and I'd taken my sparkling water to the window and watched the October light go amber over Lake Forest. The insult arrived during the salad course. Clifford was narrating a development deal in Peoria. He distributed stories through dinner the way other people passed bread, measured and deliberate. And he used me to punctuate a point about local connections. Roland, you haven't really met Adrian's fiancé, he said, gesturing down the table. She's at one of those little organic markets in Evanston. Works the register. He turned to me with a smile that was technically warm. What's it called again, sweetheart? Meadowbrook Market, I said, on Green Bay Road. Right. He nodded with the satisfaction of a man confirming something he'd already filed away. She rings people up. Very community-minded. The phrase landed like a small, clean cut, friendly in tone, precise in intention, community-minded, the way people say quaint, the way people say bless her heart. Adrian's hand found my knee under the table. He did this when he was uncomfortable. I had learned over 2 years that discomfort was not the same as action. I didn't look at him. Roland Pruitt had been lifting his wine glass. He stopped. He looked at me, not the polite 3-second evaluation of someone being reintroduced at a party, but the particular sustained attention of a man whose internal processing has leapt several steps ahead of the room. His eyes moved from my face to my hands and back again. Meadowbrook Market, he said, in Evanston. Yes. What's your last name? Vasquez Oren. Something moved through Roland's expression. Not dramatically, because he was a careful man, but the particular blankness of someone who has just been handed significant new information and is working out what to do with it. Naomi Vasquez Oren, he said. Around us, the dinner conversation continued its overlapping rhythms. Clifford's college friend was laughing about a golf trip. Adrian's sister Cordelia was explaining something to her husband about a kitchen renovation. The caterers were refilling glasses with the practiced invisibility of people who hear everything and record nothing. Yes, I said. Roland reached into his jacket, placed his phone face up on the table, typed something, and turned the screen toward me. He did it the way lawyers present exhibits, without ceremony, without editorial comment. The headline was from the Wall Street Journal, dated 3 weeks earlier. Harvest and Grove closes $520 M Series C, Midwestern Organic Chain Eyes National Expansion. The byline photo was one I recognized because I'd worn that fleece and somewhat regretted it every time. "That's you," Roland said. "It is." He picked up his wine glass and took a slow, deliberate drink. "I have been trying to get a meeting with you for 8 months, he said quietly. "My assistant has sent 4 emails to your team." "I know," I said. "We're careful about who we sit down with." He laughed, a short, genuine sound aimed mostly at himself. Clifford had been watching this exchange with growing confusion. He reached across and turned Roland's phone toward himself. I watched him read. He was a man who understood numbers professionally, who could look at a headline figure and immediately parse what it meant about valuation and market confidence and institutional trajectory. I watched him do it in real time, the processing visible in his expression, the way weather moves across a flat landscape, the number, the name, the company, the woman at the end of his table who rang up groceries. He looked up. 14 stores, I said, because I am not, fundamentally, a cruel person and the silence was becoming uncomfortable. 6 states, 2 million app subscribers on the direct delivery platform. We're opening a distribution hub in Atlanta next spring. I picked up my water glass. We expect to be in 18 states within 3 years. Well, Clifford laughed a short, controlled laugh. Time buying, I recognized it. You're just full of surprises. I've been told, I said. The room had reorganized itself around the new information. Cordelia set down her fork. Her husband was reading Roland's phone over Clifford's shoulder. One of the older couples near the far end of the table had stopped pretending to have their own conversation and were watching ours with undisguised attention. Adrian had not said a word. "Your family is from Indiana?" Clifford asked. He was recalibrating toward warmth now. I could hear it happening in real time, the conscious adjustment. "Crawfordsville," I said. "My grandmother ran an organic farm there for almost 20 years, 40 acres. She started in the late 1980s, before there was any real market for it in central Indiana, when most of her neighbors thought the certification process was either pointless or eccentric. She built her customer base by knocking on doors and showing up at farmers' markets at 5 in the morning. By the time I was in middle school, she had one of the first community-supported agriculture programs in Montgomery County. Subscribers paid up front at the start of the season and received weekly boxes of whatever was growing. She had a 3-year waiting list." "Smart woman," Miriam said. "Exceptional woman," I said. "She kept a handwritten management manual, 40 pages of observations specific to Central Indiana clay composition that she'd developed over decades. She corresponded with Purdue Extension programs. She was invited to speak at a regional agriculture conference in 2002 and turned it down because it was peak harvest season, and she refused to leave her crew without adequate supervision." I paused. "She lost the farm in 2005. The table was quiet. "I'm sorry," Roland said. "Thank you." I looked at Clifford steadily. "Your company was developing the adjacent parcel at the time. Mixed-use retail. A format your company has executed well, big box anchor, mid-range national chains, high-traffic corridor. My grandmother declined multiple purchase offers. She wasn't interested in relocating and the land was good. She used that exact word. Good, the way farmers use it, meaning deep and workable and worth staying for." I kept my voice conversational. This was a story I had told to lawyers and journalists and to myself in the dark. I knew its weight. I knew exactly where to hold it. Within 14 months of her declining the sale, the operating loan on her farm was restructured. The modification terms, rate adjustments, early payment penalties, an accelerated amortization schedule, were applied in a way that made it nearly impossible for a small agricultural operation running on seasonal cash flow to stay current. The lender who executed those modifications had a director on their loan committee, who also sat on the board of one of your company's primary financing vehicles at the time. I watched his face. The connections wasn't hidden, it was simply quiet. In 2003 and 2004, those were different things. Clifford's expression had gone very controlled. "My grandmother was in default by the fall of 2004, I said. "The foreclosure finalized in February of 2005. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Terre Haute. She lived there for 13 years on Social Security, and the dinners her church community brought on Wednesdays. She was not a woman who complained about things. She considered it a waste of time she could spend doing something useful. But she never planted another garden after she left Crawfordsville. Not in pots, not in a window box. Nothing. I asked her once why, and she said the soil wasn't right. I think what she meant was something else entirely. Nobody at the table moved. She passed in 2018, I said. She never saw the first Harvest and Grove store open. Clifford opened his mouth. In commercial development, those kinds of lending pressures. My mother and I filed suit in 2007, I said. 2 law firms, 3 years, approximately $180,000 in legal fees paid across credit cards and my mother's second mortgage. We found the emails between your CFO and the loan committee. We found the modification documents, the dates, the board membership overlap. Westbrook Properties Group settled for $40,000 in 2010 under a non-disclosure agreement. I paused. I was 19 when we filed. I used the settlement check to rent a commercial kitchen in Bloomington and buy a truck from a farm supply auction in Greencastle. I let that sit for a moment. That's where Harvest and Grove started. Cordelia had gone pale. Her husband said something low to her that I couldn't hear. Roland was looking at his hands the way people look at something they've decided not to comment on. The 2 older couples at the far end of the table had the collective expression of people who are very glad they're not the ones in the center of this. Adrian had been silent through all of it. That was the fact I kept returning to, even while I was talking, the steady, careful absence of him beside me. His hand had left my knee at some point. I hadn't noticed the exact moment. Did you know? I asked him. I kept my voice low, just between us. He looked at me, jaw tight. About the lawsuit specifically. About any of it, I said. About Harvest and Grove. About who I was. About your father's company and what happened to my grandmother's farm. The pause that followed lasted several seconds too long. I found the company when I looked up your name, he said. Early on, maybe 6 weeks in, I didn't connect it to my father immediately, and by the time I did, he stopped. By the time you did, I said. It had been a few months already. I didn't know how to. Your father called me Adrian's little friend for 3 months, I said. You were present for most of it. You told me he was old-fashioned and meant well when I mentioned it bothered me. You told me I was being too sensitive. I looked at him steadily. This man whose morning habits and fears and particular laugh I had memorized over 2 years, who had held my hand at my grandmother's bedside and cried real tears at her funeral. You let him introduce me tonight. As someone who rings up groceries, because if he knew the truth, he would have made the connection. And you didn't want to have that conversation. It wasn't. It is that simple, I said. It's exactly that simple. He looked down at the table. Miriam made a small sound and reached for her water glass. Cordelia was very still. Clifford gathered himself for one more approach. He had the survival instincts of a man who had come through bad markets and hostile regulatory environments, and 2 decades of contentious negotiation, and he applied them now with the mechanical precision of long practice. Naomi, he said, his voice settling into something almost paternal. I think there are clearly some historical business matters that deserve a proper review. We're in active discussions with Meridian Capital Group, I said. They're developing the parcel adjacent to your Naperville flagship. They've approached us about anchoring a 32,000 square foot location there. Your 2 largest retail tenants in that corridor have leases expiring within 18 months, and both are in active renegotiation because their foot traffic projections are significantly down. A Harvest and Grove flagship 2 blocks away would affect those projections materially. I met his eyes. We haven't made a final decision yet. Roland set down his fork. He did not look at Clifford. Clifford said nothing. I picked up the engagement ring from where I'd been holding it in my palm for the last several minutes. A round, brilliant solitaire, nearly 2 carats, the kind of ring chosen to signal certain things to certain people. And I set it gently on the white linen beside my bread plate. It caught the light from the chandelier above us and held it. "The dahlias are beautiful," I said to Miriam. I meant it genuinely. She had chosen well, full-headed autumn blooms in cream and deep burgundy, arranged with real skill. "The whole table is beautiful. I hope dinner is everything you planned." I picked up my bag, a canvas tote from a craft fair in Wicker Park, that Adrian had once suggested I replace and that I had declined to replace because I liked it. And I walked through the marble foyer, past the framed architectural renderings of developments past, and out the front door of Westbrook Manor into the October dark. I stood on the steps for a moment. The driveway curved down through a row of oaks gone completely gold. A groundskeeper had raked the fallen leaves into neat rows along the edges. The lake was invisible through the trees but present. That particular flat coldness Lake Michigan sends inland in October, the feeling of open water and long winters ahead. I breathed it in. Then I walked to my car, a 7-year-old Subaru, with a Harvest and Grove bumper sticker on the rear window that one of my store managers had put there as a joke, and that I'd left because it made me smile. I called Carmen somewhere near Highland Park. She picked up on the second ring. "How bad?" she said, "because she knows me." I gave the ring back. A pause. "Tell me everything." I drove south through the string of North Shore suburbs while she listened. By the time I crossed into the city, I'd told her all of it. The fork wave, the rings people up, Roland's face, Clifford's color draining away, the moment I understood that Adrian had known and calculated and said nothing. "Your grandmother," Carmen said finally, "would have absolutely loved this." "My mother called an hour ago," I said. She laughed for about 30 seconds without stopping. "Because it is funny," Carmen said, "in the specific way that things that are also devastating can be really funny." I drove home thinking about my grandmother, about her handwriting on the laminated cards she tucked into every CSA box, neat all capitals, careful and specific. What was fresh this week, what was coming, sometimes a recipe she'd been testing. About her kitchen, which smelled like soil and dried lavender and something underneath I'd never been able to name. Just the smell of that place. That specific combination of wood and light and decades of work. About the settlement check, and the way she'd cried when we told her the number, not because it was adequate. It was never going to be adequate. But because a court had written down in formal language that what was done to her was wrong. She said that counted. For the rest of her life, when she needed to, she remembered that it had been put in writing. She said that was something. I bought a truck and rented a kitchen and built her something she would have recognized. That was always the whole point. Adrian called twice over the following weeks. Both times I let it go to voicemail. The second message was longer. He said he was sorry, that he should have defended me from the beginning, that he'd been afraid of his father in ways he hadn't been honest about. His voice had the quality of someone with nothing left to protect. I listened to it twice and didn't call back. Not out of anger. Anger moves through me quickly, always has, but because of the particular clarity that arrives after you've heard the exact thing you needed to hear from someone about a year too late. You understand it. You accept it. You don't pretend it changes what it is. Clifford's company had a difficult year. The Naperville corridor went the way the projections suggested it would. I heard through Roland, who had emailed our acquisitions team within 10 days of the dinner, and who turned out to be a thoughtful and straightforward man once the context was clear, that Westbrook Properties was in quiet restructuring conversations by spring. We closed the Meridian agreement in November. The groundbreaking was on a Tuesday morning in February, 31 degrees, the ground half frozen under a flat gray Illinois sky. I wore work boots and a company fleece and a hard hat that my operations director said I had no practical reason to be wearing, and which I wore anyway, because there's something about a hard hat at a groundbreaking that feels like making a promise in physical form. A journalist from the Tribune drove out. She asked about the origin story, as journalists always do. I told her about my grandmother, about 40 acres outside Crawfordsville and the laminated cards and the 3-year waiting list. About the truck from the farm supply auction and the commercial kitchen and the name Harvest for what she built, grow for what I intended to keep growing on top of it. The journalist looked up from her notebook. What do you think she would say if she could see all of this? I thought about it. I thought about my grandmother's hands, which were always slightly stained, and which she never entirely scrubbed clean, because she said the soil was part of her now. I thought about her laugh, which started slow and surprised people who weren't expecting it. She'd ask who was managing the compost situation, I said. And then she'd say the soil looked like it had good potential. She'd say potential is the only thing worth paying real attention to. After the ceremony, when the cameras were done, I walked to the edge of the property and stood with the cold on my face. Through the bare winter trees, I could make out the corner of the Westbrook property's anchor development. The big box anchor. The national chains, real and permanent, and exactly what it had always been designed to be. I wasn't there to take anything from anyone. I had never been there for that. I was there to build something, the way my grandmother had built something, on land where the work was honest and the intention was true. Our signature coffee blend is named Clara after her. Dark roast, single origin, notes of brown sugar and dried cherry. It's our best seller, around 14,000 bags a month now and growing. Every time I see a box going out the door, I think of her handwriting. I think of her telling me once that patience was the whole secret, that the soil would tell you exactly what it needed if you stopped long enough to listen. I put on my hard hat and turned my face into the February wind, and I watched my crew break ground on something that would last.